Welcome to Conveyancing Matters. In this chat, we are going to cover the spring 2023 news. Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
So welcome to another Conveyancing Matters chat. Hi Lorraine, we've had a bit of a holiday, haven't we, with various things that have been going on. So we're back. How you been?
Yeah, a bit of a break, Stu. Yeah, not too bad, thanks, lovely. But I know a couple of months I'm away, and you've become a media star, mate. You've been on Radio 4. Do tell.
I'm not sure a media star would be the way of putting it, but yeah, I've just done a few recent interviews, mainly on property fraud, with the vicar from Luton and various bits and bobs that have been thrown around in the media. So yeah, it was just commenting on some of those cases. Yeah,
excellent. Well, of course, we did. In fact, the Conveyancing Matters chat we did about the vicar who lost his house, was very popular, was very well looked at. So good for you,
certainly
mate.
Was. Yeah, the interesting thing about the vicar as well, for those that don't know, is that he's still not got his actual house back.
Really?
So it's still, after all that time and everything we've spoken about, he's still not got his house back. And for those that don't know, the person that bought the house from the fraudster actually let the property, and that's the current problem. It's evicting the tenants that are in the property. That's the sort of next stage of that problem for him.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, I certainly think that's as a sort of I don't like to say the phrase substantive topic, but I think as a topic, Stu, that's something we ought to do an updated webinar on for our lovely Conveyancing Matters subscribers. As you know, we've and as our lovely watchers know, we've launched our Conveyancing Matters subscription service, where we offer a sort of host of content as well as monthly CPD webinars, and they're going well, Stu. We've got some firms on board now for the princely sum of £150 a year, and quite a few individuals at £40 a year. So what a bargain! Monthly webinar, lots of other stuff, and of course we've done webinars on the Building Safety Act, conflicts, and all sorts of bits and bobs today. But what have we got coming up, Stu?
Well, we're going to be continuing with the Building Safety Act, as one webinar is certainly not enough to cover that sort of meaty subject. We've got climate risk, the fire regulation changes, so there's absolutely plenty to come, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And just for information, if anybody does subscribe and they've got suggestions of webinars they'd like Stu and I to do, of course, we'd be very happy to cover them, wouldn't we, if we can, Stu?
Absolutely. And that's the really important part about Conveyancing Matters, is that we do this for everybody else. So if there were things that you guys do want to discuss and want us to delve deep into, then that's what we want to do. We don't want to pick subjects that might not be relevant to the day-to-day people that are acting in conveyancing. We want to do what you guys want to know about.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anybody that wants to join us for chat and a drink, our next Conveyancing Matters live event will be London in November. So watch this and various other spaces. So Stu, as we've had a little bit of a break, this is sort of this. I've billed this as the spring 2023 news.
Yeah.
And what I thought was actually an important point just to make generally about our news YouTube chat, Stu, is that we're trying to cover what conveyancers need to know to do their job.
That's right.
Which I think, is quite an important thing to point out, really. I mean, there's always information and chit-chat and gossip and data and all sorts of stuff that's massively relevant to conveyancers. Of course it is. Sometimes I think we're subject to information overload, but our news sessions are really based around sort of legal and practical changes and things that are going to affect conveyancers at the coalface doing their job. So with that in mind, Stu, where do you want to start?
Well, I think this could be a continuing theme for a while, but I think we're going to start on the Building Safety Act. God, who would have known? But yeah, rather than going too much into it, as I think everyone at the moment, is probably still sort of picking this meaty subject apart. It was actually the Conveyancing Association and the recent guidance that they issued that we wanted to sort of point out as, again, without going on and on and on about it, I think everybody does need to consume as much information on this subject as possible, as it is such a difficult one. And yeah, recently the Conveyancing Association did issue a guidance on the subject matter, which I think everybody will find useful.
Yeah, and I say absolutely fair play to them. I mean, it's something that, well, in the subscription webinar that I mentioned, you know, frankly, the absolute cheek of the lenders to put in the Part 1 handbook something about, you know, conveyancers should, of course, follow the guidance issued by their professional bodies and their regulators. Well, when I last looked, Stu, we didn't have any. You know, our professional bodies and our regulators have absolutely run to the hills. They've not been giving us any support, any comment, anything, any guidance on this stuff. So I did think absolutely fair play for the Conveyancing Association to put the head above the parapet. I mean, a lot of the guidance is sort of, you know, bringing together what's in the government guidance. But again, even the guidance, you know, you've probably got to have like 8 or 10 sort of tabs open at any one time to sort of follow what the guidance says, because it's all in different places. So I really thought hats off to the Conveyancing Association for this. They make it clear that it's, you know, not a comment on the law and blah blah blah, but I do think, you know, they've brought together a lot of the current information, and I just thought, you know, good on them really. But if conveyancers haven't found it and looked at it, as you said, Stu, well, frankly, you know, they should. And on the matter of guidance, something that really, Stu, and again, you and I will talk about this in more detail and how it affects conveyancers in one of our subscription webinars coming up. But, you know, the Law Society, whilst not telling us anything about the Building Safety Act, has seen fit to rise above the parapet and give us an enormous, great big load of guidance, 20, 30 odd pages on climate risk. It's been hanging around and waiting for a long time. I know you're CRC regulated, Stu, but I think we've always taken the view that what each property regulator said, the other one should probably have a look at. But yeah, I mean, just really sort of for people's information and for firms' information, the LawSoc has issued this guidance, which we've been hanging around for absolutely ages on climate risk. And apparently, according to the Law Society, firms can, and I quote, use the guidance to preempt the climate change risk your organisation faces and do business competently and compliantly. You know, this, I think, to be fair, this guidance has had a very, very, very mixed reaction. You know, there's been a lot of comment out there, and the Law Society said, you know, well, not all solicitors have expertise or training on matters relating to climate legal risks. That, to me, is the central point. You know, we don't have the training, we don't have the competence, we may not have the indemnity insurance. You know, why are we suddenly saddled with another great big set of liabilities, particularly as property lawyers? This guidance is for everybody. They apparently are going to do some property specific guidance, but I struggle with this really. I think, you know, on behalf of the sort of, dare I say, average, you know, conveyancing firm and conveyancing lawyer. So it's a watch this space, Stu, but we'll certainly pick it apart, I think, in a
no, definitely. I think we've got sort of similar opinions, but we'll pick this one to death, won't we, when we do our next subscription on it?
Yeah, absolutely. So what have you got next on the list, Stu? More obligations.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, more things that are thrust upon us. But this one, I think, really does have, you know, a lot of content that will be useful. And for those that don't know about monies in China, there's certainly something there. So the LSAG recently published guidance and an advisory note on monies coming out of China. So, you know, as most people know, investment in the UK market, particularly popular in China. However, there are, whether we want to call it rules and regulations regarding the movement of that money. I think most firms will probably be aware that there is a limit, which is normally around the 50,000, I think it's dollar mark, is it? So yeah, this guidance note just gives a bit of background to that, and gives you a bit more sort of information regarding the law, what may be permissible in China, what's okay to accept here, etc. So I think, yeah, money's coming from abroad is something that we do need to be very conscious of. its origin, etc., and with the rules in China regarding what can be released outside of their country, it's definitely an interesting read.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the guidance, Stu, and obviously firms have got to, really treat with respect anything that comes from the legal sector affinity group. I think, what coalface sort of conveyancers, MLROs, COFAs, people in the accounts teams and whatever will find interesting. They've actually listed a sort of a host of red flags that could indicate suspicious activities. But basically, at the end of the day, as with everybody that gives conveyancing firms any guidance, ultimately they say, well, the key issue, is for the firm to establish that the funds are coming from a legitimate source. Who knew? But the starting point, and the LSAG suggests, is that your starting point is enhanced due diligence. So you've already sort of, I hate to say the word, ramped up, but it's become a bit ubiquitous, that phrase, isn't it? But
it is. I think the starting point in money in China is simply the fact that I think the regulation for those guys is that literally it's £50,000 per person up in any given year. So obviously that's not going to go far when it comes to buying property in England and Wales, is it? So it does it does lead you on to sort of that enhanced due diligence and looking at where the monies are coming from, but how they're going to come out of China as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it seems to be the sort of period for guidance, because, and again, I think this could be just as interesting and important a read for CLC regulated firms as LawSoc, Stu. But the LawSoc has updated its practice note on complaints. So what to do when a complaint goes to the legal ombudsman? Their practice note is now has been updated actually as in March. Because the legal ombudsman, as I think we mentioned in an earlier news session, Stu, has sort of changed its parameters somewhat, which, as we definitely mentioned, had a bit of a knock-on firms' client care letters. But as I say, in the light of that, the Law Society has sort of amended its guidance on complaints and the processes used and what to do to try and resolve a complaint if it's gone to Leo. But I have to say, I do think, conveyancing is such a risky sort of complaint-laden area that anything, whether SRA or CLC regulated, any guidance is probably a good thing. So just as a thought. And again, just to sort of continue the guidance theme, and this won't be sort of widely applicable to lots of conveyancers too, so I'll only mention it in passing, but for anybody who's interested or needs to know more or is operating in this arena, the Law Society has also updated its guidance on blockchain, its legal and regulatory guidance report. It's now issued the 3rd edition of that on the 8th of June. It's actually updated the guidance in collaboration with some pretty august organisations, the Tech London Advocates, the Legal and Regulatory Group, and the Society for Computers and Law. And really, it's sort of talking about, crypto assets, blockchain. And the idea is that, as the complexity of distributed ledger technology grows, as the number of sort of the way that it pervades, the legal landscape sort of increases, the Law Society suggested that firms need to understand more, and hopefully that guidance will be a stepping stone to that process, is their words. So I won't say much more than that, but you've perhaps got a bit more useful coalface guidance.
Well, yeah, something maybe again, more guidance, of course, but something that actually does apply to every single person in conveyancing, and of course on a daily basis, is ID AML source of funds. And the CLC have recently released a guidance and checklist, I think it's May 2023, on source of funds and wealth. So it's definitely well worth having a look at. Again, it's a subject that we've spoken about time and time again, and the obligations that are now upon us to investigate, to the same kind of degree, the property that clients buying. the actual client themselves and profiling where they've got their money from and so on and so forth. So it's definitely worth having a look at that guidance now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly what I've found, Stu, obviously sort of getting involved with firms in a different way to you, is that, I've always thought that you and your firm have been sort of, streets ahead in terms of the due diligence on source of funds and source of wealth. And the SRA did some research 3 or 4 years ago now, but essentially in a nutshell, and of course it wasn't a huge sort of cross section of firms, but essentially it found that firms were reasonably good at source of funds, but still weren't very good at source of wealth, as in, they would get bank statements from clients to show where the money was that they were putting towards a purchase, be it a cash purchase or, of course, just the deposit and the fees. So they got the source of funds thing sort of knocked off, but firms were still quite poor at source of wealth, as in where did the client get their money from, and what's the reason.
I think it's a bit of an industry issue, because a lot of the automated systems that we use for ID check-in focuses very heavy on the ID, which I'm sure we'll find on. But of course, there are now ways in which we can upload bank statements. But the keys, of course, interpreting those bank statements, that's the actual crucial part of it. Your client profiling and your KYC, etc., that can only be done by actually going through those bank statements. That's the issue. And people don't give that the care and attention that often it deserves. We had one not that long ago in the office whereby client didn't have a passport, didn't have a driving license. And of course, automatically, we can't assume that they're a criminal or there's a problem. So we have to profile that client. But for somebody that didn't drive, this particular client had lots of entries on their bank statements from petrol stations, for example. So actually, by going through those bank statements, there's a lot you can find out. Going on the same kind of example, if you had a client that, an elderly client maybe that doesn't have, say again, a passport, you can look through their bank statements, and if they were investos in cryptocurrency and they're 82, you'd think, hang on a second, I can't profile this client, it's not actually adding up. So I think it's we're so reliant now, aren't we, on automation. And yeah, okay, we can upload bank statements, great, brilliant, it's very helpful and it streamlines the process from the client's perspective, but we mustn't always lose track of what we need to do as lawyers in terms of investigating that information that we receive.
Yeah, I mean, it's that age-old thing that we always mention, Stu, isn't it? I mean, but it's the buck stopping the responsibility and the indemnity insurance at risk if something goes wrong. And I think what a lot of firms do, on a lot of different levels, actually, totally understandably, I might add, given the pressures. It's not a criticism; it's just, I think, a statement of fact. Is that I think if we have an electronic process which is really only to support the conveyancing process, I think a lot of firms and a lot of fee earners, frankly, of whatever their level of experience, tend to think, oh, that's that box tick, that's that job done. And nobody is actually, as you say, sort of analysing the information that's there, rather than just simply filing, without really turning their mind to what the prop tech provider has given you. I mean, I know I've told you on more than one occasion, Stu, I've been into firms and the AML check was done against the wrong name. It was a typo, and the lass who did it sort of said, I said, well, we need to do this again, we're about to exchange, because I always do my pre-exchange checks when I'm locoming. And she said, well, I can't, who's going to pay for that then? Why isn't that one any good? I said, well, it's not the client's name because it's spelled wrong. And she said, well, we can't do it. Well, who's going to pay for that? I said, well, the firm's going to have to pay for it because the firm did it wrong in the first place. But I have to say, Stu, I worked for a long time in a geographical location where there was an older demographic, I must say, which of course was fantastic because it meant fewer mortgages and much more cake generally. But of course, the elderly client with no driving license and no passport, I always found really very, very straightforward in most cases to profile, because they're the profile of client who's got every council tax bill going back to the year dot. They've got all of their letters from the Department of Pensions. They've probably still got the letters from 1972 from their law firm when they purchased that property. So oddly enough, you've got to.
They'll have things like copies of birth certificates. I mean, yes. I wouldn't have a clue what my birth certificate is. No idea. But they would have they would have a copy of the birth certificate. So yeah, it's amazing how I get told all the time, oh, this is a massive problem. They don't have a a passport and a driving license. It's right. Okay, well, what have we done from here then to look into this client? And it's normally nothing. You know, well, actually, yeah, we can act for them. It's not a problem.
Yeah.
You know, send the stuff over, but I am going to need this. So I can look into them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so but good on the CLC for producing the guidance.
Yeah,
I think it's sort of well set out, and invariably, I think it's going to help some firms. Well, Stu, I don't know. I wouldn't dare suggest that our chat with Mike Harlow in January, the Deputy Chief Land Registrar, has had anything to do with our next couple of entries. And I'm sure, removing my tongue from my cheek, these initiatives that the Land Reg have recently announced have been in train for a very long time and since well before our chat. But however, firms might be interested to know, if they haven't picked up on this, is that the Land Reg has recently announced some more specialist support for firms. And of course, Stu, you and I are of the vintage that, obviously I'm so much older than you, darling, but we remember being able to pick up the phone to the Land Reg, perhaps to one of the land registry lawyers, to perhaps chat through a sort of difficult matter on a title or an unregistered title or whatever, come to a conclusion and then submit the application. I mean, you remember those days, don't you, Stu?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, you know, you needed their support, especially when I was sort of training yonks ago. You know, you wanted to pick up the phone and talk through that complicated restriction or entry on the title that you weren't sure about. And, you know, it does look like the Land Registry have listened to maybe what the industry wanted.
Yeah, I mean, because they rode right backwards from that position, probably.
They did, certainly, yeah.
20 years ago, and I can't say as I blame them really, but just really for firms, it's not going to be this isn't going to be stuff they need every day, but basically they're billing this specialist support as, and I quote, quick and easy access to guidance from Land Registry specialist support services available to conveyancers, solicitors, blah blah blah. So what are they giving us? Well, support with registering complex commercial transactions or infrastructure developments, but the ask for guidance service. So you can get expert support with complex queries, inquiries, but the criteria are that it must relate to a new piece of work and not an existing application. And this, I think, is perhaps the zinger here, though, because this one, the second limb of this is that the answers to the query must not already be covered in any of the Land Registry's practice guides. Now, at last counting, I think there's about 80 practice guides, so I think you're going to be doing well to find something that isn't somewhere buried in a Land Registry practice guide. But anyway, they've put that in. You can use the ask for guidance service for developing estates and of 6 or more plots. Why to quote agony aunts Stu, don't developers get Land Registry estate plan approval on new builds?
Well, wouldn't it be helpful? I mean, yeah.
I just don't get it. But dear developers, please note that if you've got a development of 6 or more plots, get support from the Land Reg. Estate layout, boundary plans, draft transfer leases, other associated documents. That invariably is going to help, the poor conveyancers and their clients that then don't have to wait a year for a new build to be registered. Guidance on large scale applications, and also interestingly, guidance on large scale voluntary first registrations. So stuff, to be fair, that's probably not going to help the cold face conveyancer every day, yeah. But I certainly think the developers could do with listening, and if you're dealing with developers, you might want to point those services out to their lawyers.
Yeah. Well, let's hope though this is a step in the right direction. Yeah. Let's hope it's not to the expense of some of these registrations proceeding, as that's obviously still a problem, but at least it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of steps in the right direction, Stu,
steps in the right direction.
Yeah. What else has the Land Registry suggested? Obviously, following our discussion with Mike.
I've no idea what you're talking about.
The Land Registry's recruitment drive. They've also mentioned that they're going to be recruiting more assistant land registrars. So happy days. As I'm taking the mickey a bit, but I'm sure this is part of the planned recruitment that's been in train for months. But I think it's interesting that when we spoke to Mike in January, access to land registry people, not enough land registry lawyers at the coalface dealing with the complex stuff, were certainly things that came out of the discussion. And 6 months later, they've been, they're coming out. So
well, it's a good time for them to recruit anyway, isn't it? So
yeah, good for them, absolutely. So what next, Stu?
Well, one thing we thought would be worthy of a mention was the Renters Reform Bill.
Yeah.
So for those that don't know, it's in the main the abolish of the Section 21 no fault notice. So yeah, it's something that obviously later in the year is going to rumble on. It's only a bill at this stage, but yeah, something that's certainly worth looking into, especially if you do a lot of landlord and tenants.
Yeah, I think so.
Anonymous with the Section 21. So yeah, something to look into.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, normally, I wouldn't want us to be talking about something that's only a bill, because, bills often don't actually ever hit the statute book. And I think we've got so much to deal with that's on our plate now, that looking at something that might never be on our plate is sometimes not worth it. But I'm pleased you've mentioned it, Stu, because I do think it's, conveyancers need to have a weather eye on this, because, as you say, it will be the biggest overhaul of private rental legislation, well, in more than a generation, really. What we've got, was originally introduced with the Housing Act 1988, and it's lasted that long. These are going to be quite big changes, I think, if they come about, particularly for
very big. Yeah,
and of course, I think probably I think the tenancy deposit scheme, Stu, I don't know about your experience, but the introduction of that was probably the last nail in the coffin for property lawyers doing assured short hold tenancies. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%.
I used to do loads when I was first in practice. But
maybe, yeah, I mean, before even 2000, I think we were doing some then, but in latter years, not many.
No, so the agents tend to do all that now, which I think is a different set of issues. But I think, as you say, I think the reason that conveyancers need to have a weather eye on this, because you might say, well, if I don't do them, why is it of interest to me? Well, if you are buying a buy-to-let subject to a tenancy, then this is going to seriously affect if it comes in eventually. And
selling, of course, as well, don't forget.
Absolutely.
Not just buying.
So I do think, conveyancers need to be looking out for that, really. And probably to conclude, Stu, just a couple of little sort of land registry tweaks. Our fraud restriction, our Form LL restriction, which have always been a little bit controversial. The conveyancer requiring to confirm that the deed is signed, by the true registered proprietor. Just really for information, the Land Registry has updated Practice Guide 19, specifically section 3.1.5.8, and just gives a little bit more detail about how the Land Registry proceed and deal with those restrictions. So just worth having a look at that, really. And also, again, the Land Registry has updated Practice Guide 25 on leases, when to register leases, and given a bit more information on doing registrations where the landlord's title is leasehold, and there's a note saying that the lease restricts alienation. So it's a bit specific. I won't say more than that, but it is always worth conveyancers keeping up to date with these land reg changes to their practice guides, because some of them are relevant to what we do every day. Well, Stu, that was, I think, a lot more than we thought we were going to say for our return to Conveyancing Matters news on YouTube. So it's been lovely to catch up. Yeah. Well, again, remind people about our subscriptions, and wish everybody well, I think.
That's it. Definitely. It was a fun
All
chat.
Right, Stu, you take care, lovely.
See you soon.
Bye.